Okay, the second question was, what was your relationship to the class when you joined and why you joined? Okay, well, I just kind of went through that with my last answer to the question. So, but I had no relationship with the class before because they didn't exist before, except for a few months, and they weren't available to me during that time. I first became aware of them in September of 1975 when they posted that poster and held that meeting in Walport, Oregon. And that's the meeting that ended up causing the police to get involved with the press. And I was directly involved in that because of, I guess I need to go into all that. I was just, because two of my friends that were also joining had 2 children, and they were young, and they were arranging for the real dad of the 2 children, who lived nearby, not in the same town, but he was near Portland, to take the kids. And then they had some friends that were going to take the kids so they could join the group. And TiDo didn't know anything about TiDo or Peep and Bo, but you say it TiDo or Bo and Peep in reverse, like that. I guess that's the way normally you hear it said. And I don't know what they would have said to that couple with the children, but they didn't know that they were arranging for their children to come. However, during the meeting, Doe did say that children cannot join because they don't have the capacity to make that kind of a decision for themselves. This is an individual decision to leave your world behind. You can't make a child do that. That's why all these groups and cults that have children, that's the number one sign that they're not the real deal. Because the real deal isn't going to have children. There were no children with Jesus, even though, he talked about children a little bit. When children were shown, brought to him for his blessing or whatever. And he said you have to become like children. But there were no children in the group. There were no married people in the group. There were no... he didn't even consider the vehicle's mother his mother. So basically it's a new family that they're starting. And so you can't bring your old family to start a relationship with a new family. It is that real. And now there were a few young ones that were like 16 that wanted to join, and TiDo, I believe, in one case I know, sought a type of permission from the parent of the girl that was 16. I'm not sure exactly the details of that, but I know that there were special arrangements for that person to where they could know where their daughter was. But the daughter had been living apart from the parents anyway before that, even at 16. I think she might have been a runaway or something. I don't know exactly, but I know she wasn't living in a conventional situation at a home with her parents at the time. Anyway, so she didn't end up staying in the group that long, and she lives near San Antonio now, and I visited her once. But I joined because the message spoke to me loud and clear. And so I'm going to skip now to the next question, because I already answered this one. What was it like living in the Rancho Santa Fe house? Well, I didn't live in the Rancho Santa Fe house because I left the group in 1994, in September of 1994, almost exactly 19 years after I joined. And now I was in other mansions that we had, many of them, in Arizona, in Paradise Valley, Arizona, in Scottsdale, Arizona, in very big homes in Dallas, Texas, in San Antonio, near San Antonio, in Austin. We lived in a mansion that was John Wayne, one of John Wayne's homes in Newport Beach, California. Anyway, so as far as living in big crafts, I know how they lived, we lived in homes that were equivalent to Rancho Santa Fe, because the homes that we lived in when I was there also had tennis courts and swimming pool, and sometimes an indoor swimming pool, sometimes an indoor tennis court, but we had like anywhere from 30 to 40 people, at the most 48, I believe, living in. I don't know if we ever had 48 living in one house, because TiDo also rented 2 and 3 homes. Frequently in the beginning, they would have their residence, and then or an apartment, and then this was after we spent a couple of years out on the living outdoors in the wilderness, which is the Revelations 12 woman. The first mention of wilderness, I believe, is when T took us to the wilderness in Wyoming to camp to start the overcoming process after the prophecy period was over, the 3.5 years, which can be recorded almost to the day. They fulfill all the prophecies, and I'm studying it, so I can actually answer any of those questions for somebody that wants to know. And I'm putting out my book in a short time that's well over 1,000 pages of answers to those questions. So the next question is, I understand that living situations were organized in star clusters. How is your living quarters more of a spacecraft than a house? What made it feel like a spaceship? Was there anything that was done to the living quarters to remind you that it was a simulation for craft living? No, there wasn't. Starting at the end of that, there was nothing done to the inside of the house or the outside of the house that made it look like a spacecraft, unless you want to consider that it was, well, no, there was nothing. I mean, it wasn't even sparsely decorated or sparsely furniture. It wasn't sparse, and it wasn't all like ultra modern furniture necessarily. It was, nice stuff. TiDo wanted to, for several reasons, they wanted the house to look normal, so that when the realtor would come in, or any workmen or anything, it wouldn't look weird. Because I mean, we would actually run and hide when people would come, because frankly, you weren't allowed to live with 20 people in an area that's zoned for one family. So we could easily get kicked out. And so TiDo were very security conscious in that way about everything, even our water usage. They paid strict attention to that. They didn't want to use so much water that it would, because you were in a town with city water. They could, you could say, like, especially in drought areas, or like in San Diego and stuff where we lived, where there's not as much water available sometimes. It could raise a flag that there's something going on there. They use a lot of water. And the same thing with, I think, everything. There was one house we lived in to where TiDo had us put paper over the windows so that nobody could see in. And there was one house we lived in to where we would come and go in vans, and we would lay down in the vans so that people wouldn't see how many people were in the van. And we would put paper we couldn't actually put paper on the van windows. Some of them you could, but you could shade them to a certain degree. It was still legal, and they would do that. And then when we'd come and go, we would come into a garage. So we would have the automatic garage door opener, come in the garage and unload a van of 6 or 8 people, because we had jobs outside the group when we lived in homes. And we call those out-of-craft tasks, because we were thinking about it as a simulation of a spacecraft. Now, how were we thinking about it that way? In the way we operated, it was very it's not militaristic, but organized in a sense like a military, to where you have schedules for everything, down to the minute. So that, like for instance, we showered every day, and shaved every day. Well, you didn't have to shave every day if your beard wasn't heavy, but every other day, or every third day, I think, was the procedure. And procedures were developed over time as needed. It was like TiDo didn't come out and say, this is the way you do this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. No, they waited for questions. Because the way a student forms a bond with the teacher is by learning how they think and act in all circumstances. Every detail. Doesn't matter what it is. That's why instructions were given in the Moses camp to help people both be willing to follow instructions and try to follow instructions to the letter, because that's very important on a spacecraft or in a laboratory. And for the sake of the experiment, the next level crew members, the crew leaders, need to be able to trust that the crew members can do things precisely. So that if you're in a laboratory, I mean, any chemist knows this, that you have to be precise about what you do. Well, the next level isn't really any different than that, except that they do it on a more professional scale, and it's their full-time work. And they don't sleep, they don't eat, so they're working all the time, doing things that are exciting, are challenging, are interesting, traveling throughout the heavens on the spacecrafts, assisting people on the gardens, whatever it is, being the support network for somebody that's got boots on the ground, incarnate, that's taken over came in a crashed UFO, and then the soul came and took over a human body that was prepped for it and woke it up, or a human body that wanted to have a relationship with what they could consider to be the highest form of intelligence in the universe, and they were asking in that way. And so the next level said, okay, we're going to send you one of our souls that's going to interface with you, and you're going to have the option to choose every day to be in a classroom with an older member, and you're going to learn the ways of the next level. And if you want to leave, you can leave. Now, TiDo didn't take too kindly, well, I shouldn't say it that way. They wanted to be informed when somebody was going to leave, which was hard to do for some that wanted to leave, because for various reasons they just wanted to leave. They wanted to get out. There was never any abuse whatsoever in the classroom. But it wasn't necessarily the cup of tea for anybody that didn't have all the most right reasons for being there. Like if you were thinking that you would get a chance to ride on a UFO, that wasn't going to get you through the classroom, because that was not actually happening. And when that didn't happen, when they thought it was going to happen, people left. And that happened a number of times where they thought it might happen and it didn't, and people left. But that served to actually filter out those individuals that weren't really there for the most right reason, which doesn't mean that they were a failure, just means that that timing wasn't appropriate at that point. They weren't in the first fruits harvest. Because you have to be naturally inclined to want to become this new creature. And in a sense, a very real sense, I wasn't ready either, and that's why I left. Which is a long story that I may or may not go into during these questions and answers. So, so when we worked in, like, TiDo renamed a lot of things. For instance, the kitchen was named a NutriLab, like nutrition lab. Everything was like a laboratory. And so if you were working in the laboratory, we always worked in pairs, which were like considered to be check partners, because where two minds were together, you had a better chance of coming out with a good product, a good result in the experiment. So they talked about how the meal was considered to be an experiment, and they even went so far as to have a little whiteboard where they would post the formula, and the formula might be MP, standing for mashed potatoes, plus C for corn, plus chicken, or whatever it was on the menu, equals body changes. Now, body changes meant that you were actually growing your soul by following the lead, the mind, the information, the instructions, the ways and behaviors of the older member, of the crew leader, of the captain and the admiral in this case. T was more or less like an admiral, and Do was more or less like a captain. And we were not even privates. We were like petitioning to be privates. Although there might have been some there that were privates that were trying to become sergeants. And that might be what you could think of as the 24 elders. Because there were, in the end, 24 of us remaining before we ended up putting out the Beyond Human series tapes, that some that were in like halfway situations, living externally from the main craft, decided when they saw those tapes that they wanted to rejoin, and they were given the option to rejoin. People didn't have a chance to rejoin in between those periods of time when Do opened that door and T opened that door. There was one exception to that, or a couple exceptions to that, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I mean, there's hours and hours of conversation about all this. And so if you're doing an experiment and you had to measure a half teaspoon of salt, one person would be the measurer and would take the salt, and you measured it a certain way so that you could be consistent, so it would always be the same amount of salt in that half teaspoon, because the way you hold your blade on your knife that you're scraping over the spoon has to do with how much salt is going to be pushed out of that. So they were detailed about these things, and T spent a lot of time with people in these labs, because we had a yeast lab for baking that I was in a lot. And they weren't like demanding or commanding or authoritative, or never yelled. There was never any yelling, never even any raising of the voice. There was no drama. There was no walking up and down the stage, talking. There was no dress that made you look holy, except for one period of time to where they did give us robes to wear. They wore robes and we wore robes. And during that period of time, we did more meditation. And so I guess that was like the time that we were having more of a spiritual sense. And I'm not sure why they did that, but it didn't last forever. We ended up not having those anymore. But we had uniforms frequently. And there were reasons for that. And I can go into all the reasons, but this would be hours and hours and hours if I told you all the reasons. So that's enough on that, I guess. I'm going to cut it off and start a new tape.